Once in royal David's city stood a lowly cattle shed, where the mother laid her baby in a manger for his bed. Mary was that
A very warm welcome to you all from the Holst Singers, Jerry and myself, to this year's Breathing Matters Christmas concert. For those of you who have attended our live concerts in previous years, you will notice that this year we are in a different setting, St Mark's Church in Regent's Park, a venue familiar to the Holst Singers as this is their home for many of their rehearsals. We are very grateful to the staff of St Mark's for allowing us to use the church to record the Christmas concert. We are very sorry we are not able to hold our usual Christmas fundraising concert this year. We made the decision not to have our usual evening in December with audience again, as although live concerts and theatrical performances are now taking place, we feel it is perhaps too soon for people to feel confident about attending an event with a large gathering of people. We anticipated that during the winter, the number of daily reported COVID-19 cases could be high, and are conscious that some of our regular audience members have been identified as clinically extremely vulnerable to COVID-19 due to their complex lung conditions, and additionally may also be significantly immunocompromised. Although COVID-19 restrictions have now been lifted in England, 2021 has again been a very difficult year for charities, especially small charities such as Breathing Matters. The Christmas concert is in fact Breathing Matters' only homegrown event this year. 2021 is a special year for Breathing Matters as it is our 10th anniversary year, and you will see from viewing the recording we have a brand new logo to mark the occasion. For me, the Christmas concert is one of the most important and special evenings of the year. The concert not only raises a lot of money for bronchiectasis research, but also helps to raise awareness of this little known and misunderstood disease. I'm hoping that all my other usual fundraising activities, which are on hold at present due to the pandemic, will be able to recommence next year. We decided not to sell tickets for a live streamed concert on a particular date so as to allow you the flexibility and opportunity to access the recording when it is convenient for you. Please do share the recording link with your friends and family. I have set up a Just Giving page to coincide with our online concert in hope we will receive donations in support to our fundraising this Christmas. Last year, the Holst Singers recorded a small selection of carols which raised just under £3,000 for Professor Brown's research into bronchiectasis, lung infection and pneumonia. It would be fantastic if we could match or raise even more this year. If you would like to make a donation, please either send a cheque to me payable to Breathing Matters UCLH Charity or by accessing the Just Giving page I have set up specifically for the concert. The link is posted on the Breathing Matters website. Before I hand over to Jerry, I would like to take this opportunity to thank him enormously for all his work with his team at University College London and University College London Hospital. A huge thank you, especially this last 2 years during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also for his and his colleagues' outstanding work on the JCVI for advising the government on the COVID-19 vaccine programme for us all in the UK. Over the last 2 years during the pandemic, computers and technology have played a significant and important role in our lives. And this week, on the internet, I found a rather quirky poem called "'Twas a Computer Christmas." "'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the shop, the computers were whirring, they never do stop. The power was on and the temperature right, in hopes that the input would feed back that night. The system was ready, the program was coded, and memory drums had been carefully loaded. While adding a Christmassy glow to the scene, the lights on the console flashed red, white, and green. When out in the hall there arose such a clatter, the programmer ran to see what was the matter. Away to the hallway he flew like a flash, forgetting his key in his curious dash. He stood in the hallway and looked all about, when the door slammed behind him and he was locked out. Then in the computer room, what should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer? And a little old man, who with scarcely a pause chuckled, 'My name is Santa, the last name is Claus.' The computer was startled, confused by the name, then it buzzed as it heard the old fellow exclaim, 'This is Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen and Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen.' With all these old names, it was puzzled anew. It hummed and it clanked, and a main circuit blew. It searched in its memory core, trying to think. Then the multi-line printer went out on the blink. Unable to do its electronic job, it said in a voice that was almost a sob, 'Your eyes, how they twinkle, your dimples so merry, your cheeks so like roses, your nose like a cherry, your smile, all these things I've been programmed to know, and at data recall I am more than so-so. But your name and your address, computers can't lie, are things that I just cannot identify. You've a jolly old face and a little round belly that shakes when you laugh like a bowl full of jelly. My scanners can see you, but still I insist, since you're not in my program, you cannot exist.' Old Santa just chuckled a merry ho-ho and sat down to type a quick word or so. The keyboard clattered, its sound sharp and clean, as Santa fed this data to the machine. 'Kids everywhere know me, I come every year. The presents I bring add to everyone's cheer. But you won't get anything, that's plain to see. Too bad you programmers forget about me.' Then he faced the machine and said with a shrug, 'Merry Christmas to all,' as he pulled out its plug.
My name is Jeremy Brown. I'm Professor of Respiratory Infection at University College London and University College London Hospital. I'm very grateful for the Holst Singers holding this concert for us and raising funds for our research for breathing matters into lung infections. We do research into three main areas which are related to lung infections. The first is bronchiectasis, which is a chronic disease affecting the lungs where damage causes basically long-term low-grade infection with flares occurring every now and then, which cause exacerbations, which was where people get quite unwell for a period of time and need antibiotics. And the disease itself can, over a long period of time, lead to lung destruction and problems with breathing, but only in the most severe cases. The other area of research I do is pneumonia, which has been for most of my academic life into a bug called Streptococcus pneumoniae, which is essentially the commonest cause of pneumonia in the world and basically causes half of all pneumonia cases that occur in this country. And the research I do into that is really into vaccine development and trying to work out what makes that bug capable of causing pneumonia so easily in so many people. We've actually extended that research into another bacteria called Acinetobacter baumannii, which is a long word for describing a bug that is relatively rare and causes pneumonia just like pneumococcus does, but it's different in that it's very resistant to antibiotics. So its importance is that although it's not common, it causes really very difficult infections to treat. And our research is into different methods of treating it which might overcome that resistance to antibiotics, because otherwise it has a 50% mortality, which is obviously very high indeed. And the last bit of research that we do now is, as a consequence of the pandemic, into COVID research. And most of the research that occurs that I'm related to with COVID is to the long-term effects of actually having had an acute infection. So when you get into hospital, obviously you're very sick, you have a pneumonia, and fortunately most people recover, but as they recover there's some damage that may be done in some people, and what our research is aiming to identify is who gets damaged, in what way, and how long that damage may last and how it affects them. So that's an ongoing research project directly related to the pandemic. So have we made progress in the research? Well, yes, actually, even though the pandemic has disrupted what we've been doing over the past couple of years, we've had some good research outcomes, and data is coming through quite nicely. So we've now got a method of assessing people to work out how susceptible they may be to pneumonia. It measures the antibody levels to pneumococcus, to multiple different components of the pneumococcus in one go, and that gives us a very good feel, a fingerprint of how susceptible somebody may be to pneumococcus. Now, so that will be useful to identify those who are particularly at risk in the future. We do have a couple of vaccine candidates which have been taken forward into trials, and I've spoken about them before, and more work has been going on them, and that's developed even further. And the pneumococcal research has been, I'm grateful to say, has been funded by the Wellcome for the next 5 years, so that's a big success from a researcher point of view. The work on Acinetobacter, that's working very well, and we will probably have some form of therapy, we would hope, in the next 3 or 4 years, which might be used in clinical trials. That would be the trajectory for that. And then the COVID work, yes, well, we have published data defining on who gets significant problems after having an acute COVID infection and how that may affect them. And that's clearly an ongoing problem because we need to see how it develops in those people over the next 2 or 3 years. As Jane mentioned, the other big thing that's been happening for the past year is I have, for my sins, been a member of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation and on the COVID subcommittee specifically. And that has involved around 70 2 to 3 hour meetings since September last year, deciding on the vaccine policy or advising on the vaccine policy for the UK. And that's clearly been a very important part of my work over the past year and taken an awful lot of time. Every single one of those meetings has been virtual, and I can safely say that I have spoken to members of that committee considerably more than I have to my own children over the past year. So what about COVID? Where are we? Yeah, it's perhaps not as well as we thought we would be. But the one big thing is that if you'd asked me last November, that would I be happy with a vaccine that's 95% effective at preventing people from dying from COVID? I would have leapt at that, because the chance of having a vaccine that was that effective, especially in people who are most susceptible, which are the elderly, would be remarkable. And it is remarkable we have a vaccine. So it's fair to ask, why do we still have a problem, despite the fact that the vaccine is really very effective? And there are 3 main reasons. One, not everyone's been vaccinated. So 95% of people who are vulnerable who's been vaccinated, that means 5% have not. That's about 700, 800,000 people. And if they have a 1 or 2% mortality from COVID, you can do the sums and you can work out that's a few people who are potentially liable to die from severe COVID. The other issue is that there's a very high incidence of infection in the community, and that because Delta variant of COVID is highly infective, and without any social distancing measures or any strong degrees of social distancing, there will be very high levels of infection in the community. And that means a spillover into people who are susceptible. So even if you've been vaccinated, 95% of people will not get severe disease. That means 5% will. And unfortunately, that also means that if the vaccine wanes in its efficacy from 95% to 90%, the number of people goes up from 5% to 10% who can get severe disease. And that's where we are at the moment, where we've had about 1,700 deaths over the past 3 weeks. And I think that's an understatement, 2,700 deaths over the past 3 weeks, 50% of which are in the over 80s, in vaccinated over 80s. And the reason why is because the vaccine does wear off its efficacy to a certain extent. And that is why the booster program is immensely important, especially for those who are vaccinated the beginning part of the year, which are the elderly and those who are most vulnerable to the disease. And it's a pertinent question to ask is how often will we need to reboost people's vaccine immunity? And I can't answer that question. We know we need to do it now, which is about 6 months after the second dose in most people. But whether we need to do it another 6 months or another 12 months or another 24 months, I won't be able to tell you until spring, maybe summer next year, because we have to wait for the data to come through. It also matters that the high level of infection in the community at the moment is high. It seems to be dropping, and that is a sort of glimpse of a positive future, because we would hope that this sort of pandemic phase where you get these big waves of infection is wearing down, and that what we had this autumn and this early part of the winter, these high levels of infections will fade and resolve to a large extent and become much more a low level of infection which crumbles along and is much more copable with. Because at the moment 5% of the NHS beds are occupied by people with COVID, and it's in a period when it's winter, when you have people who might be coming in with flu, if there's a flu epidemic this year, and we have real problems with staffing and discharging patients to social care, because social care is very much under strain, and that always causes a backlog in the hospital. That 5% of people with COVID puts an incredible strain on the hospital system as a consequence. But it's sort of, there's glimpses that maybe towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, this COVID situation will become more of an endemic rather than pandemic problem, we hope. I've been wrong before in my thoughts about what's going to happen with COVID, but I do think this is potentially a period where we will come through it shortly. So that's a bit negative. So there are positive things that have come out of this pandemic. And there's two main ones which I think are relevant. One is that actually we have shown that in the space of 12 months, you get a new infection causing pneumonia, somebody somewhere can devise a vaccine. In fact, people have devised several vaccines which are very effective in a very short period of time and produce a very large number of doses in 12 months. So, I mean, the numbers of people who've been vaccinated across the globe for COVID, it's not enough, but if you look at the numbers, it's amazing how many people have been vaccinated within a 12-month period. And that bodes well because that means we can do it again if we have to. The other thing is directly relevant for those people who get bronchiectasis, who have bronchiectasis, who get pneumonia, which is actually the incidence of exacerbations of bronchiectasis, and we now have the data to prove this, has gone down by half. And the number of people coming into hospital with pneumococcal pneumonia has also gone down by about half. And the reason why is because of the social distancing that we have had over the past few waves of infection, which has restricted the number of viral infections that people catch, and those viruses is what causes the exacerbations in a lot of people with bronchiectasis and predisposes people to getting pneumonia. So the standard thing is you catch a flu or a flu-like virus, and that allows the pneumococcal bacteria into your lungs to cause pneumonia. And during the lockdown, there have been very much less respiratory viral infections, and that means that we now know that quite a lot of the exacerbations that people get can be prevented if we can think of a way of stopping respiratory viral infections without having to shut down the entire country. And that, I think, is an important message that has come through over the past year. So I shall stop talking about lung infections and medical matters, and I will now do the thank yous, which are a very important component of this. First of all, I'm going to thank Martin, who's on the end of that camera at the moment, filming me, hopefully. And thank you very much for your time and doing the recordings for us, because without you, obviously, this online concert could not happen. And a big thank you to Mike, the conductor for the choir. Obviously, the concert could not go ahead without his skills and expertise, so we're very grateful for his contribution there. And also for James Orford, the organist, for exactly the same reason. That without his contribution, we could not possibly have this carol concert this evening. I'd also like to thank Profile Pharma for their donation towards my research, which is a very helpful component of my research, and without which various things would not happen that need to happen on the research side. Clearly, the Holst Singers themselves need a big thank you. They give up their time every year to do this concert. They might be getting bored about hearing about bronchiectasis, perhaps, I don't know. But I'm very grateful to listen for their time and their contribution, and it's always a joy to listen to the concert. And it's a pity it isn't a live one this year. And lastly, I need to thank Jane, of course, because without Jane, there is no concert. She organises it, she chivies me and chavies me and makes sure I do what I need to do and say the right thing at the right time. And without Jane, we would not have a concert at all. So I'm very grateful for Jane's contribution. And so thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoy the concert, and a happy Christmas and a good New Year. And perhaps we'll see each other in the next year or so.
second day of Christmas, my true love sent to me 2 turtle doves
and a partridge in a pear tree.
On the third day of Christmas, my true love sent to me 3 French hens,
2 turtle doves.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
On the 4th day of Christmas, my true love sent to me 4 calling birds,
3 French hens,
2 turtle doves.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
Partridge in a pear tree, partridge in a pear tree.
On the 5th day of Christmas, my true love sent to me
5 golden
calling birds,
3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree, in a pear tree, partridge in a pear tree. The 6th day of Christmas, my true love sent to me 6 whistling, 5 golden
calling birds,
3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree, in a pear tree, partridge in a pear tree.
On the 7th day of Christmas, my true love sent to me 7
Sweet and baby, 6 whistling,
5 calling birds, 3
French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree, in a pear tree, partridge in a pear tree. The 8th day of Christmas, my true love sent to me 8 middling, sweet and baby, 6 whistling, 5 golden
calling birds, 3
French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree, in a pear tree, partridge in a pear tree.
On the 9th day of Christmas, my true love sent to me 9
Ladies dancing, 8 maids and living, 7 swings and swings, 6 whistling, 5 golden
calling birds, 3
French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree, in a pear tree, partridge in a pear tree. On the 10th day of Christmas, my true love sent to me 10 drummers.